So much of life is spent looking ahead to the future, thinking and dreaming about what's next. What big thing am I going to accomplish down the road? How am I going to get there? What is life going to look like 20, 30 years from now? Even as little kids, I think we start thinking about this. Right? We start dreaming about what we're going to become when we get older. Am I going to be a fireman or a policeman? Am I going to be an astronaut one day? Sure, and we grow up and these things change, these ideas of what we're going to become, and the reality maybe sets in that's never going to happen. But we're still thinking about what's next, what we're going to be one day, what we're going to accomplish one day. I know in my life personally, I spend so much time thinking about the future. So much time thinking about what I'm going to become, where I'm going to be down the road. I get so caught up in, God, how are you going to use me? God, how have you called me? God, how am I going to use the gifts and the things you've given me to influence and to impact people down the road? And in the process of that, I forget about how God has called me, how God wants to use me now, here, today. So much of our life, I think, is spent looking ahead and thinking about how we're going to do some big thing instead of actually doing it. When I think of life, sometimes I picture it as this journey, right? This journey that we're taking on this path, on this trail. And we might have this big picture of what our destination is going to be, but we have no clue how we're going to get there. All we can do is take one step after the other, down this trail, down this path. We can only trust our next step. We can only dictate and direct our next foothold. In life, I think it's the same way. That as long as we can have this destination in mind, but we have no clue how we're going to get there. We can only trust God one step at a time. Put one foot in front of the other. When I think of someone who trusted God and was faithful in the small things, in the little things, I think of King David in the Bible. King David was constantly simply just trusting in God, just taking one step after another. See, David was shepherding his father's flocks. He was taking care of and watching over his father's sheep. And this guy by the name of Samuel comes up to David. Samuel was God's prophet, was God's messenger. And Samuel comes to David with this message and says to David, David, one day you are going to become king of Israel. You're going to become king of God's chosen people. David was 12 years old when he heard this news from Samuel. And all David simply did was continue to trust God. He continued to be faithful in the small things. He continued shepherding his father's sheep. One day he began to work in the palace of King Saul. He'd play the harp for King Saul. He was faithful in that. He didn't come in saying, Saul, one day I'm going to become king of Israel. One day I'm going to succeed you and take your place. No, David simply trusted in God's plan and God's timing. He trusted that God would lead him there. All he needed to do was simply put one foot in front of the other. David's story and David's life continues. Eventually, David becomes king of Israel. But it took 32 years for that to take place. 32 years since the time that he was a 12-year-old boy and Samuel told him to become king to when he actually became king of Israel. See, David said, God, I know you're in control. God, I trust your plan. I trust your timing. All I can do is live for you today. Trust you today. Be faithful today. When I think of this idea of being faithful in the little things, I think of this passage in Proverbs. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. A lot of you guys have probably heard it before. It simply says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. right? Simply trust God with all that you have. Every part of you, trust God. Don't worry about where you're going to go, where you're going to end up. Simply trust God today. Trust that God is big enough to lead you and to guide you. And it says that God, that the creator of the universe, will direct your paths, will lead your steps. We simply need to trust Him. I think we can learn a lot from that. Of trusting in God one step, one moment at a time. Then instead of looking so far into the future and what's next and what are we going to do and what are we going to accomplish, simply saying, okay, God, you've given me today. How can I live for you today? How can I trust you today? How can I be so excited to live for you and be filled with your love that I simply take that next step? To be faithful in the things that you've called me to do today. To love and to lead the people that you put in my life now. So guys, how can we take the next step? How can we be faithful in the small things and say, okay, God, I trust you for this next step. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know where and when I'm going to get to that destination. I just know that you've called me to go down this path and take one step after the other, after the other. Guys, when we go, when we trust, when we follow Jesus, when we be faithful in the little things He's called us to. That as we go down this journey, this trail, this path of life, we'll be faithful in the small things. When we let God lead us and direct our steps. We trust that through the little things, God will do great things. If we simply put one foot in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other.